mai, whakarongo mai, ki te ao tai whenua. Welcome to Country Life. I'm Sally Round. Welcome to the summer series, when we take you back to some of the places we've been to over the past year. Today we meet botanist Hugh Wilson, who's helping recloak hills on Banks Peninsula. And we're finding out about sheep farming under solar panels in the far north. But first, producer Janina Schwaneke is out tracking kiwi on a farm near Wellington.
It's dusk when I meet the Capital Kiwi project team near Te Rawhiti Station.
I'm Paul Ward and I'm the founder and project lead for the Capital Kiwi project.
I'm Jeff Hall. I guess I'm a field services ranger, I suppose you could call me, for the Capital Kiwi project. Now also live locally here in Makara.
We set off to the top of the farm. From there, the sea is still as glass and the sky is just turning a soft pink. There's no wind and the turbines are quiet except for a faint hum. The perfect conditions to catch a kiwi call. A number of the birds released were fitted with transmitters to help with monitoring. Jeff takes out a transmitter to help with our search.
Every week or two, just the transmitters output a whole lot of information to us as to whether they're incubating on, if they could be nesting, or what they've been, how much activity they've been up to every night. Horribly loud.
The frequency of beeps offers insights into the kiwis' habits and where they might be.
Yes, so that's a bird across the gully from us here, a few hundred metres. And at the moment, that the beeps you can hear, it's going through its output sequence, which when I'm in the field, I would sit down and be counting the beeps and recording them, and then I can put those into a database, and then that spits out at me what the bird's been up to, whether it's nesting or whether it's been out for 8 hours last night or not, or
it's a bit like a Fitbit for a kiwi. If you look at this landscape that we're standing in now, which is, lots of ferns, lots of like low-growing scrub and things, sometimes you can hone in on a spot that might be like 5 metres square, but it still might take you 10-15 minutes to figure out where the bird is in that patch, and that's when the dogs come in useful.
But yeah, the transmitter technology definitely makes life a lot easier. We don't have to interfere, and it's an annual process of catching the bird, refitting the transmitter, and then it's hands off until they nest. Once a chick has hatched, we're able to then catch the chick at the nest and start monitoring the chick.
Our ultimate goal is to have no monitored birds whatsoever, and to have, once we've got the confidence that this population is settled, established and growing, our goal is to remove those transmitters and for the birds to live their wild lives on Wellington's hills. That was what was so exciting about our first chicks. So when they made that fighting weight of 1.2 kilos, which was about 6 weeks ago, two months ago, Jeff. When we snipped their transmitter off, they were our first homegrown wild kiwi chicks on the hills of Pōneke in a long, long time.
It's the realisation of a project more than 7 years in the making.
We were able to bring the first kiwi back in late 2022, and then over the last couple of years, we've got 138 kiwi. People might be surprised about how adaptable and resilient kiwi are. One of the things we like to remind people is that they are tough, feisty, and you don't name your rugby league team or your army after... I didn't organise that.
So that would be where we've got a male and female calling to each other?
The male sounded like it was the one across the valley here, and the female...
Maybe somewhere
in
the gully.
Yeah,
So just for context as well, where those calls have came from is probably like 300 or 400 metres away from us. So as I was saying, they are quite tough, feisty animals. With a little bit of care from us, they can live alongside us in the wild on the hills.
We stay for a bit longer and hear even more Kiwi before heading back down to Makara. I ask Paul and Jeff how it feels to see the project realised and to hear Kiwi back in the hills of Wellington.
Pretty special. It kind of you get the chills when you hear those birds calling from the hills. And there's been 7 or 8 years work gone into this effort to return Kiwi. Our landowners, our iwi, our communities that have put so much into it. So when you do hear those birds calling, and tonight, Jeff, I think we heard three pairs and the odd individual. It's very sweet.
What about for you, Jeff? How are you feeling after tonight's listening?
It's always exciting to hear Kiwi in any space, but to hear them out the back of Wellington here is next level, really.
That story produced by Janina Schwanneker. She was speaking to Paul Ward and Jeff Hall of the Capital Kiwi project. Let's head to Te Tai Tokerau, Northland now.
I'll give you a hard hit, Sally.
Thank you.
So I'll maybe just give a quick overview and then you can record.
Farms can be pretty noisy places. Tractors in the paddock, dogs barking, sheep bleating, milking machines in the dairy shed. But the first thing you notice about this farm is the silence. But in fact, there is a harvest going on this flat piece of peaty land not far from Kaitaia. That sound you can faintly hear is the automatic lifting of solar panels following the movement of the sun. Let's take a closer listen to the sound of energy being harvested. Instead of a herd of cows or a flock of chickens, this farm's stock is an array of panels, lined up like dark waves on the paddock. But that's not all that's being farmed. Look down and there are sheep resting in the shade and grazing on the grass among the panels. I've come to Lodestone's Kohirā Solar Farm to find out more about this new frontier in agriculture, agrivoltaics.
It's impressive.
Growing food and producing energy at the same time is a relatively new idea in New Zealand. In other countries, China for instance, they're well ahead. There are hundreds of projects incorporating farming with solar panels, from greenhouses underneath panels for veggie growing to shrimp farming underneath panels poking out of the sea. There are berry orchards, salad plots, even vineyards under panels in Europe and North America. It's said this dual farming system has many potential benefits. Less stress on the animals and crops with panels providing shade and protection, and improved productivity and added revenue for the farmer amid the ups and downs of weather and commodity prices. But there are many unknowns too. Let's get back to the farm and meet Connor Dent, who looks after the sheep at Kohirā.
So this is our largest flock of sheep in Field 1 at the Kohirā Solar Farm. And we have about 170 ewes, and these ewes are sort of 3 to 4 years old, and they're currently all in lamb. So they've had a ram running with them for a couple of months, and we've had our first lamb out of this flock drop on the ground this morning actually. It's quite an early lambing, but we're blessed in the whānau with a reasonably mild winter, so we can afford to lamb early, and that means we sort of get the lambs to the market a bit quicker than the rest of the country. Currently we're working to sort of really establish our stock numbers that the farm can handle. We don't really want to push this farm to the point where we're having to feed out, and the management that comes with that is probably not worth the benefits.
How are they taking to grazing among the solar panels?
They tell me they're very happy. So what we've noticed is that we see the sheep sitting down for longer periods than most farms, which means that they're sort of content, they're full, and they seem to be pretty relaxed here. So I'm not intrinsically tracking the numbers in terms of some other studies potentially are around the country, but they seem to be definitely spending a lot of the time under the panels, sitting down, and they're not spending all day on their feet eating.
Lodestone owns and runs the solar farm. It's a New Zealand company, and Richard Pearce is the firm's chief operating officer.
Solar farm's been named Kohirā, which means harnessing from the sun. I describe this farm as something incredibly peaceful and powerful. We've got 61,000 solar panels installed on this farm that generate 24.7 megawatts of electricity, and throughout the year that equates to 56 gigawatt hours of energy that we're producing for the electricity market. That equates to about 7,000 homes. Lodestone's vision from day one was to build renewable energy, generate electricity from the sun, and we wanted to do that in a sustainable way, and so a large part of that is to be able to integrate our operations with traditional farming practices. So agrivoltaics, to me, is an opportunity I think it presents for both electricity generators like Lodestone Energy and for the farming community to work together to perhaps move towards a lower carbon economy. And we want to do that in a sustainable way. We want to work with farmers like Connor and others around the country to make sure that the farming practice is sustainable for them, to make sure there's low impact to our operations of our solar farm, and to make sure that can be done in a really safe way. So what you can hear there is the actuators that drive the panels. The panels track the sun from east to west during the day, and so every 5 or 10 minutes you'll hear them just measure exactly where they need to be, and they'll just move slightly a few degrees at a time.
Have the sheep got used to that noise? I suppose they have.
They don't seem to be too bothered.
They don't seem to be too bothered. They're just continuing to graze. So what is the potential, do you think? I mean, you have sheep on here at the moment. Did you look at having beef cattle and perhaps rearranging the infrastructure accordingly?
Yeah, so the solar farm has been developed and designed to elevate the panels above the ground. They pivot at about 2 metre height. And that's for two reasons. One, it's to allow the panels to move to maximise the production from the sun. But two, to minimise flood risk. And so they're sort of the farm's well suited to sheep in particular. I think cattle would be too damaging for the solar panels. They'd like to rub their backs all over them particularly when they're oriented at 45 degrees. So at this stage we're considering a model that's farming livestock and sheep. We describe our practice going forward, and we're working with Connor on this as around vegetation management rather than just grazing. So we don't describe it as a grazing lease. We describe it as vegetation management, and in that we want to be able to manage our vegetation to a level that minimises fire risk. It makes the farm look tidy, of course, so there's benefits in that. We want, of course, the sheep to prosper in this environment so that the yield is high. At the same time, we want our electricity production yield to be maximised as well.
If you didn't have the sheep, how would you manage the vegetation?
Well, the only other option there for us would be to mow. And so a vegetation management contract will be a combination of grazing sheep, mowing, and some spraying of weeds and around some of the infrastructure where you can't get to with mowers. A combination of those things. We don't know what that balance will be, but over time we'll work that out together to see what optimal proportions of each of that will be. And ultimately it needs to be sustainable. Connor needs to make $1 out of it, and we need to be able to run a sustainable electricity production site.
So do you charge him for the grazing?
We are still working through the commercials around that. We want to know we need to understand exactly what the farmer's costs will be throughout the year, and to work out, what a fair commercial rate will be for both grazing and also for us to pay for other vegetation management activities like mowing. There's a real cost involved in all that, so we're working through that, and no doubt we'll land somewhere sensible that makes sense to both parties.
Now you have got other plans for agrivoltaics that you're looking at for your solar farms around the country. What's happening? Yeah,
so Lodestone has a portfolio of solar farms that we are building and ultimately own and operate. This first one here in Kaitaia, and the second one was handed over to operations a couple of weeks ago in Edgecombe, and a third one that's in advanced stages of construction in Waitahi. So both of those farms in the Bay of Plenty region. And so within our phase one, there's 5 sites that we plan to deliver, and then into phase 2, at least 10 more. So our plan is to do that in a sustainable way, and to get farmers interested in coming and working with us to farm and optimally working together to do great things. So, but in the Whakatane region, there's some challenges in itself because it's largely a dairy farming community. And so our sites there, we're actively looking for a farmer that will want to graze some sheep there, and that presents some challenges, but we think we'll get there. And in addition to that, we think, there will be horticultural opportunities at some of these farms. And we're in the learning stages of that. Of course, it's done well internationally. We need to work out how to do that in New Zealand. And so we're working with it. We have an agri-business consultant, Anna Vaughan, who we're working closely with to help guide us on some strategy in and around that to make sure that we're thinking about the farm in the way in which we should, because we're not experts in farming, but we want to become. We want to do that in a way that everybody does it well, and the farm is well maintained, and we can be proud of the farming activity, both in respect to solar and in traditional farming practice. So we're working with Anna, and we've started some early discussions with the universities around some research opportunities, around discovering what would add the most value to the research around agrivoltaics.
Any ideas so far?
Well, any ideas? Well, we're looking, perhaps the Edgecombe site might lend itself to have an area which we corner off for horticultural development, and do some really good research around that to see how sustainable that is and what the right types of crops or herbs or fruits or whatever that might be ultimately that can be farmed in an economic way.
Yes, I guess you're having to work with shade and plants that benefit from a bit of shade as well.
That's right, and I understand from international, from talking to some of the guys internationally that do agrivoltaics or horticulture, that the solar panels allow for water retention in the soil to be sustained a little bit longer, and so the shade offers benefit not only to the livestock but also to the crops, whatever is planted. The water retention is good, and so it would appear by all counts that horticulture can be very successful as well if it's done well.
Not all welcome the idea of solar farms. Some fear the loss of productive land for food production and visual pollution, known as glint and glare. Richard says they haven't had any pushback.
The communities have been really supportive to date of both the solar farming activity, and over time they'll understand a bit more what we're doing in the agrivoltaic space, and I think they'll be supportive of that as well.
Do you have to do agrivoltaics, do you think, in order to get that social licence to do what you're doing?
I think it's an important part of what we want to do. I think it's an important part of transitioning to a lower carbon economy, is to be able to do this together. I mean, it's exciting that you can do this together, integrate these two activities so well. I mean, the common factor between traditional farming and solar generation is that we need to harness energy from the sun. And so all of that, and from the farming perspective, that goes into producing grass or vegetation to maximise yield from stock. From our perspective, it's around accessing as much solar energy as we can for every square metre to maximise the energy yield or production each year. So those two things can work quite harmoniously together. I keep forgetting you've got gates now.
It's such a nuisance, isn't it? Every field is gated, mate, to keep them in there.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'd love cattle stops, to be honest, but they're just not as cost effective.
It's still in the experimental stage at Kohirā. Things like pasture and sheep growth are an unknown quantity. There's been a bit of money to spend on fencing, gates, troughs and yards for the sheep. Connor says they've taken well to the new environment without doing any damage to the solar arrays.
So in the morning, these panels they tilt right over to face the eastern sun, the rising sun, and they probably are about 600 to 800 mil off the ground. Don't quote me on the numbers. So they actually potentially could, but the sheep, they're the right animal for the job because they don't have any interest in sort of scratching up against the panels. It's something that we have to be mindful of when we bring a sheepdog in here to round them up and get them out of the paddock, that we actually choose the right time of the day, that we're not pushing them and they start running and jumping up and hitting their backs on the panels. But it's a pretty minimal risk to have to manage.
How do your dogs cope with all the posts and the panels when they're rounding up the sheep?
That's a fair
bit
comment.
of an obstacle course?
It is. And they actually struggle early in the morning if the panels are down, or late in the evening, to see right through and find all the sheep. But they seem to get them out, and the sheep seem to know where to go anyway. So no, we haven't had too many dramas on that.
What about grass growth with the amount of shade that you have from the panels?
At the moment, we're not noticing any slowdown. You can see in between the panels now, we're about midday and there's probably a good 7 metres of clear sunlight. And as the panels tilt, where that shading is also moves. So the sun still reaches all parts of the field throughout the day. In fairness, it's not getting sun for 12 hours of the day.
What about the quality of the pasture?
Yeah, no complaints. I think post-construction, because the solar farm's still in its first year, after practical completion, there was, a little bit of damage to the farm just with the machinery used to it, and that's since fully restored itself. And as we put in the sheep in there, they seem to be tidying it up. And then when we pull them out, we're sort of looking at a 2 to 3 week turnaround, and we're getting really good bounce back in some of the paddocks. And it's quite a quick rotation with the ability to put the sheep back into that paddock not long after they come out.
Will you be doing sort of measuring of, pregnancy rates and that sort of thing just to evaluate how this has gone?
Totally, no, that's definitely what we'll be aiming to do. At the moment, we're pretty much tracking the cost that's going in and the dead and alive count sort of thing, so it's not too high level at the moment, but we would like to start doing that. We hope that they're at a better weight than most of the rest of the lambs around the country.
So you'll be fattening the lambs here as well?
Yeah, that'll be the goal, yeah. So at the moment, our first 2 years is really stock numbers and establishing our benchmark of what the farm can handle without overstocking it. We'd like to stay under our sustainable number for a while. We don't want to overstock it and run out of grass for the sheep.
Tell me about yourself and how you got into farming sheep under solar panels.
So I'm not much of a farmer myself, I must admit. I do civil construction as my day job, and I was fortunate enough to actually do all of the civils on this project with Far North Roading, where I work locally. And then beyond that, it was one of my friend's ideas to sort of reach out and see if the lease was available, the grazing lease. With the current market of the sheep schedule and the price of lamb, I don't think a lot of people are looking to develop sheep farms at the moment. We were really fortunate to be given the opportunity from Lodestone, and it's a really pleasant pace to farm. So I think I'm really glad that we've jumped out and taken the opportunity. And
what's the potential, do you think, for other people with a flock of sheep to get involved in this?
There's definitely still potential to make $1 out of the business. Otherwise, we wouldn't be down here doing it, right? The benefit of this farm in particular and how Lodestone have developed it, there's still areas around the farm that can be used for other agricultural purposes, such as growing maize, growing corn, watermelon, kumara. There's opportunity to put cattle within the other fields. It's just that risk needs to be managed around the sort of, having cattle on the farm. Are they going to break the fence and cause damage to the panels? At the moment, the sheep seem like the go-to animal or the vegetation management tool that we should be using. And I suppose financially, ask me in another year and hopefully we'll be able to give you an answer. But at the moment, we'll see how it goes.
So if you're a farmer wanting to get into agrivoltaics, what's the best way to do it? Partnering with a solar company and leasing land to them? Buying and installing your own panels? Or just providing the livestock like Connor? Can the land be sloping? Is it even feasible if you're a long way from power transmission? There are loads of questions and some research underway to understand how agrivoltaics might work in New Zealand conditions. A recent Our Land and Water study of an 1,180-hectare sheep and beef farm with solar panels added to a 6-hectare paddock showed a possible increase in annual farm income close to $1 million, with net profit increasing by more than $420,000. That's with the farmer owning and installing the array. It wasn't so profitable for the dairy farm in the study. Richard Pearce says solar farming offers farmers an alternative additional revenue stream. And there's also the plus of helping to reduce carbon emissions.
There's quite an exciting prospect for farming and, helping through those tougher times where this revenue stream will be more constant for the farming community that get involved in agrivoltaics.
Do you want to hear from more farmers who want to get involved in this?
Absolutely. We have plans to build solar farms up and down the country, North Island and South Island. And a large part of the success of those solar farms, we're working with the farming community to understand the pros and cons of agrivoltaic activity and to learn together and to do that in a really practical way that we both benefit from. Would you be putting solar panels on farmland owned by the farmer, for instance? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. The Phase 1 sites, Lodestone Energy procured these sites to allow us to get underway with building them. But our Phase 2 development sites are largely lease option arrangements.
And how many panels would a farmer look at getting to make it feasible for them economically?
Yeah, I think this farm here is we have a land area of 80 hectares, and we have infrastructure installed across 50 hectares of that. So that's 61,000 panels, and we think that's a nice size for for discrete, it's a nice size for us to place in various parts around the country. There'll be some larger solar farms we also build, which will present a slightly different opportunity for the farmers in different parts of the country where there's access to larger capacity through transmission connection rather than a local distribution network connection. Those farms will ultimately be larger and present a different opportunity of scale for farmers.
Yes, how far do they have to be from that infrastructure?
Yeah, so this farm, we connect a few kilometres away into Top Energy's electricity network. That works well, and the farm is constrained by how much energy you can inject into the network for them to be able to manage that power flow. There's certain parts of the country where it lends itself, where the great farms and great capacity available. So we work to identify where they are. So when we're looking to work with farmers, some of the questions we ask are around where are you located, how close are you to an electricity distribution network or to a transmission network, depending on the scale, and they are key considerations in whether the farm would ultimately be economic.
And how would you help a farmer deal with any pushback from local neighbours?
We get involved in very early stages around community engagement, around what we want to do on the farm in respect of developing renewable energy infrastructure. So quite detailed consultation processes that we follow with the community, with the local iwi, and we run that all the way through consenting to make sure we understand exactly what the impact of our activity will be on the farms. And then, and then we'll support the farmers coming and working with us to do their farming activity on these properties. Continue to do that and support them every step of the way.
I was talking there to Richard Pearce of Lodestone Energy and earlier to Connor Dent, who runs sheep at the solar farm in Kaitaia.
I'm John Whittaker, the flower man from Fielding, and you're listening to Country Life at RNZ National.
Finally, in this Country Life summer series, to Banks Peninsula and Hinewai Reserve, where Cosmo Kentish Barnes met reserve manager and botanist Hugh Wilson, who spent years encouraging nature to reforest what was once rough and gorsy farmland.
Hello.
Very nice to meet you.
You too.
Good.
Now, Hugh, we are about to head out into the reserve. Can you tell me what we can see from your little house here?
Every direction is a beautiful view, but looking down the valley, we just see a big valley of regenerating native forest down to Otanerito Bay. And the wonderful news is that we've just extended the reserve right down to the sea there, down to the beach. But then if you turn in other directions, you just see a lovely skyline of regenerating bush and even some old growth patches of bush up on the Skyline Beach, and then just a wee bit further round to the highest part of the reserve. That's Taratari Hill or Stony Bay Peak. It goes up into the subalpine zone. So in every direction is a beautiful view.
Is there a farm down by the beach there, at the bottom of the valley?
That's my neighbours, the Nabis. They've been here since almost the beginning of European settlement. The family has.
Yep.
Faye has got Māori ancestry as well. And Brian has got way back to French ancestry. So that's an interesting mixture in terms of the peninsula's history.
And we can see some of their farmland on the heads. And I guess that's what, sheep and cattle grazing land?
Sheep and cattle, yep. Although that right-hand headland is a famous historical site as well. That was where the first major interaction between Ngāi Tahu and Ngāti Māmoe was. About 1700. Moki came down with a fleet of canoes to settle some score. The word's kinship relations as well. And it was a pa called Parakakariki on the headland there. There's nothing you can see there now, but there's lots of implements and artefacts came from that area. Yep.
And when did you first come here?
It was 1987 the reserve started, but before that as a botanist, I was doing a botanical survey of Banks Peninsula, so I had visited here already. And this little farmlet that was a nucleus of Hinewai was owned by a friend of my brother Jim. So I camped here, before the trust bought this first block of land.
So this was farmland?
It was all farmed, can you believe? Yeah. All this nonsense about native bush growing slowly, it's all complete bullshit. Oh, I'm not allowed to say that, am I? No, it's complete nonsense.
People won't mind, I'm sure. No, you're right. I mean, the valley is entirely covered in bush.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Where does the name Hinewai come from?
It's a lovely legend about Hinewai the water maiden and Unuku the rainbow, But it's not, I have to admit, it's not a local Māori name. We did ask permission whether we could use that name. Also not permission, but just approval from the local iwi, local runanga. Yes, so it means the water maiden.
Did they think that was suitable for this land?
They did, and I loved it. Well, I didn't think of that name. It was on the old wool bale stencil from this little farmlet. Yeah.
Bit of history.
We were going to come up with all sorts of invented Māori names and English names, and then we found this wool bale stencil, and it seemed perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it happened.
And it all started with the 109 hectares, and now you've got to over 1,500.
Yeah, we look after about 1,600, something like that, 1,600 hectares. And 192 of those are actually owned by another trust, which we look after. It's a North Island trust called the Native Forest Restoration Trust.
Yes. Do you have volunteers?
Well, funnily enough, we don't use volunteers very much because we've got this little team of 4 of us who all know what we're doing. And, well, I think we do.
So there's Ash, Max,
and Paul, who you won't meet today. He's down the bottom. He's actually building a very sophisticated stile across a fence on our new beach track. But since we put out a little documentary about a video one, Happen Films put it out, we've been swamped with offers of volunteers, and it's lovely, but it's just impractical. We can't manage vast numbers of volunteers.
And if people are interested in watching that documentary, it's called Fools and Dreamers.
I'm not the only fool. There was more than one. But a lot of people come here and say they've seen the video and they're very keen to see the whole project. So it's been really good from all over the world as well.
Well, talking about that, when I parked my car up by the road, there was a French man wandering around.
Yep. No, we get people from everywhere.
I said hello and he said bonjour.
Comment allez-vous? So people come here without asking permission. They just can freely come in, visit the visitor centre, walk wherever they want along the track system. Yeah.
And how many kilometres of tracks have you built here?
It's about 20 kilometres, I think, including 2 tracks that run through Purple Peak Reserve.
And what should people expect if they come and do one of these walks?
They expect to see some old growth forest, many hectares of it, but then many, many hectares of regenerating native forest.
Yes.
And the bird life is really good, and lizards and insects and all sorts, spiders galore, streams, waterfalls. Yep.
And where are we about to head to now? What's happening today?
Today, well, we're just going to be walking over along West Track to the work face through lots and lots of regenerating bush on what was once farmland. Where actually Ash and Max, if it stays dry, will be taking gorse and broom out of the boundary there. And then we'll end up in the old growth forest. Only about 4% of Hinewai is old growth forest. Wandering through it, people don't realise that because you're under a high regenerated canopy anyway. But when they go into the tall red beech forest on Beach Terrace, they realise they're in something different.
Another world.
It is another world. And it was a world that was all so dominant here 700 years ago.
Now, Max, how long have you been working here?
This is our third summer.
How did you find out about the reserve?
I grew up here on Banks Peninsula, round in Pigeon Bay, so kind of was always aware of it. And then saw a job advertised for a summer worker and kind of jumped on it and ended up getting a gig, and they kept wanting me to come back.
And Ash, you've both got backpacks on. What are you carrying?
I've got a bit of everything we need for the day, really. Lunch, the most important thing. And no, we've got loppers, a pruning saw, and a tiny bit of herbicide as well.
Yes. So could you be out for the entire day doing work?
Leave the house about 8:30 and come back by 5. Yeah.
Okay, well let's head off.
All right.
They're good, those walking sticks, aren't they?
Wonderful. I got talked into them and they're terrific. It's terrific for balance. As we get older, we lose a bit of balance. And crossing streams and things, it's fantastic.
I walked up to the top of Mount Somers recently, and honestly, I really did need that walking stick.
Oh, isn't Mount Somers terrific, though?
Yeah, it was hard yakka.
Hard yakka. I love that sort of sloping, gentle snow tussock. At the top, you don't expect it.
It's beautiful.
It looks pointed from the plains.
Now we are at the visitor centre here, and this is the old, shearing shed?
Yeah, the old wool shed, yeah. In 1987 or 88, a friend called Martin Oldering, he just made it his project to convert this. We'll just have a look in the door if you like.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Into accommodation and information centre. And it's been a fantastic facility for the reserve. It's used every day by day visitors, and we sleep up to 12 people.
Oh, so we've just come in and there's a big relief map of the reserve.
Southeast corner of Banks Peninsula.
There are books here and photographs. You've really got a history of Hinewai on the wall, haven't you?
Yeah.
How do people find out about the lodge here?
Oh, they simply have to ring me up in the evenings between about 7:30 and 9:30. But we close it for overnight accommodation. We close it for the winter. So we end at the end of this month for overnight accommodation, and then it opens again on the 1st of October.
There aren't many shearing sheds that are totally surrounded by a native bush.
No. Yeah, nature's just itching to put the bush back and has been getting on with it. Even while I was grazing here, the farmers have to keep fighting the kānaka, colonising their pastures, and we've just taken away the things that slow all that down, like farm animals, possums, goats. We've got a bit of an incipient wild deer problem now. So we try and remove all the deleterious things that are stopping nature just getting on with putting the bush back. And so that's all the serious work's done by nature here. We plant very little, only just a few specimen native trees around the visitor centre and the houses. And all these millions and millions of regenerating native trees are all natural regeneration. There's just absolutely no shortage of seed. And no shortage, even though we've lost some of our bird species, there's no shortage of dispersal mechanisms either by birds or by wind. So seed production's not an issue. Nature's done all the planting, all the significant planting.
Now we've just passed a pest trap.
Yep.
What are you targeting?
That's actually for stoats and ferrets, but it's a complicated thing here because the rats are the worst of the lot, and we can't control the rats, not on 1,600 hectares, not effectively. We control them around the houses. Oh, sorry.
That's good.
But we do target the mustelids and the cats down by the penguins at the sea, and we're really hammering the possums.
Now, gorse has played a big part in the regeneration project, hasn't it?
It has. And of course we did get some flack from that at first, because when we said that gorse was infesting this landscape and the only way of effectively getting rid of it was to let the native bush come through and shade it out and kill it.
Yep.
It was, of course, met with a lot of scepticism. But there's no sceptics around us now, because they'd have to shut their eyes to be sceptical now. This bit of land we're on now, this was basically gorse-infested pasture. And there's still some gorse, but very old and lanky, and more natives than gorse now. All these things are shade-tolerant natives that have just come through under the gorse canopy.
So you tolerate the gorse because it creates a nurse canopy for the natives.
Yeah, and tolerate's the right word, because we'd rather not have it. And there's natives that do the same. There's a harrier hawk just gliding over there. The native kānaka is the native coloniser, woody coloniser here. Here's a big old gorse bush, and it's on its last legs. And in 2014, it was about 28 years old.
And you're holding the gorse bush as though it's your old friend.
And not even prickly, you see. Well, the foliage is prickly still, but the trunk isn't. It's an appalling weed for farmers. They've spent all their lives trying to fight it on this marginal hill country, and sometimes with success, but sometimes it's just depressingly impossible. So I can completely understand both the hatred of gorse and the scepticism that it gives way to native forest. I understand it, but it's wrong.
Did you ever think that the land would change so quickly when you first started?
I sound a bit pompous. Yes, I did. I did think it would happen at about this speed. But it's very refreshing to see it happening. Yeah, some of the farmers used to say to me, how do you know that the natives will come through the gorse? And I'd say things like, well, you can never be certain about everything, but I'm about as certain that the sun will come up tomorrow morning.
Looking down towards the valley, we can see the forest sway like a green ocean in the wind.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Those big trees are beeches punching up through the kānaka. The kānaka makes a beautiful nurse canopy for beech. Beech is really interesting on Banks Peninsula because it's only naturally in the southeast corner. And shortly we'll be in the old growth forest. Incidentally, Cosmo, this is another slip with lots of natives beating the gorse. See that? You think gorse grows fast, but that's fuchsia, seven-finger, pate, poroporo, grows in wineberry especially, grows immensely quickly. And mahoi, one of our commonest native hardwood, even more common than kānuka, but shade tolerant.
Now there is a bench here, and we can sit down and admire this huge and majestic totara.
Beautiful totara, maybe 600 years old, we're just guessing. Well, more than a guess, a sort of educated guess, yeah. And it's a way when you think of what this has seen, because this would have been, it would have germinated not long after Polynesian settlement, maybe 150 years after Polynesian settlement. And when Captain Cook sailed right past our bay in the Endeavour in February 1770, this tree would have been quite a sizable tree. And it's not really a typical totara shape, is it? It's very bushy, because it's been growing in the open for a long time. Now the regenerating forest is all around it, but it's sticking way up above it.
And it's a male?
Yes, it's a male. Yeah, the podocarps all have their sexes on separate trees, but there's plenty of females around too. We've got totara regenerating beautifully here. And the other podocarps too, kakatea, matai, 2 species of totara. Yeah.
From what you've learnt about the work you've done here, what would you say to people that have marginal hill country land that they're not sure about what to do with?
You have to be careful what you tell people to do, don't you?
Yeah.
No, but it's fantastic on Banks Peninsula. It's not just because of what Hinewai, but Hinewai is a lovely example of what happens. But they were doing it anyway, to some extent. But now more and more people are just realising it's ridiculous to try and keep farming steep gullies and things when you can get carbon credits for them as well. But all of the biodiversity gains also. So more and more people are fencing off their gullies here on the peninsula. It's very hopeful, really.
And talking about carbon credits, they are really important to this reserve, aren't they?
Oh, they're so complicated, though. But yes, we do. A lot of our land purchase fund comes from carbon credit income. So we get carbon credits for regenerating natural forests. We've actually had a premium to some extent because of the broker that we were using, Toitu, based at Manaki Whenua, Land Care Research. So we get a bit of a biodiversity premium as well. Businesses want to buy Hinewai credits because there's all the biodiversity pluses as well. So it has been good, and it's been complicated as well because initially you think, well, these trees are going to grow anyway. What we really seem to be doing is just solving people's consciences while they go on emitting. But it hasn't really worked like that. We only sell to businesses who are committed to carbon zero in the fairly short term.
So you pick and choose?
We do.
Who purchases these credits?
We do, yeah. Yeah, we sort of ethically vet every business that our carbon credits are sold to. It's quite interesting.
And how much money can that generate?
Well, to give you an idea, about 1 hectare of regenerating forest like this sequesters every year about up to 10 tonnes of carbon dioxide. That's a gas. That's 10 tonnes of carbon dioxide gas. And sequesters it in all the plant materials, the wood and the foliage and the litter on the ground and everything. And the price per tonne or per unit, a unit is 1 tonne, metric tonne of carbon dioxide. So that started off the lowest we've ever got was about $15 per tonne, but then it went up to way above $70, and it's shrunk back a bit now, but it is a significant income for sure. And sometimes I've been called an ecological imperialist by the neighbours, but most of the neighbours are right behind what we're doing.
Yeah, why would they say that?
Well, because we seem to be wanting more and more land. But the good thing is the carbon money goes into the purchase of more land, which we wouldn't have been able to buy otherwise, and that's sequestering more carbon. So I think it's a very good way of using carbon credit money.
And recently you purchased, about 80 hectares of land?
That's our biggest news lately.
Down by the sea?
Yes. We do reach the sea in Stony Bay with our lovely neighbours, the Armstrongs, over there. But we have had a bit of an issue with access to the beach on Tanarito Valley here. And now we've bought land on the northeast side of the bay, and we're just in the process of putting a walking track down. So public access will be there, carefully managed.
And that's thanks to the carbon credits and donations?
It is. Carbon credits and donations are our 2 huge sources of income now. That's a brown creeper's calling there, which is a unique South Island bird. And they're here in huge numbers. This is a real stronghold for BPP.
A little kind of squeaky noise.
Yeah. That's saying its Māori name all the time. BPP, BPP. Yeah.
That is the name of your newsletter.
Oh, yes, it is. And the idea is that it's always chittering away about how good life is on the reserve.
Yes, and you send out a newsletter twice a year, and it's all handwritten.
It is.
Why don't you use a typewriter or a computer?
Well, because we're trying to keep some of these lovely old things alive. People are forgetting how to write and how to think sometimes too, I think. So, no, we're keeping all these old things alive. I'm not poo-pooing technology. Got some marvellous technology myself, a mountain bike, for example. Got electricity. That's about it. A rural mailbox. Some technology is wonderful.
Yes. You haven't got a car. No. So would you bike from here all the way to Akaroa?
Oh, yes, frequently to Akaroa. And up until quite recently, I biked into Christchurch. That was my way of getting to Christchurch. But now I haven't got a self-righteous leg to stand on because there's a concession to extreme old age. When I go to Christchurch, which is not a huge amount to do in Christchurch, to be honest, so I don't go all that often, maybe 4 or 5 times a year. Then I bike over the hill to Akaroa, put my bike on the lovely local Akaroa French Connection shuttle, and then ride off the other end into Christchurch. So it's a wonderfully efficient way of getting to Christchurch.
You don't need a car?
No, not at all. No, absolutely not. I did own a car once, and it was what a waste of money and time that was.
Tell me about Morris, who started this whole thing off.
Yeah, he was a Christchurch businessman, basically, and an accountant. He was actually lived his childhood on Wainui, on the other side of Akaroa Harbour from here. And he just set up a fund for purchasing land on Banks Peninsula for conservation purposes.
Gosh, how generous.
About 10 years before I met him. So when he met me, who was a botanist wandering all over Banks Peninsula, doing a botanical survey, he just asked me to look out for land. And he said, are you interested in the project? And I think I waited about half a nanosecond. I said, yes, and there's been some hassles, but no regrets ever since. And that was 40 years ago, basically, when I first met him.
And you went from 109 hectares to over 1,500. How did that happen? How did you get so much more land?
Well, the first addition onto the 109 hectares was Otanerito Station, which was just so weed infested, and by Banks Peninsula standards so big that it went through owner after owner trying to make a living out of it. And then when it came on the market 4 years after we'd bought this 109 hectares, we were almost surrounded by it. Just seemed we just had to at least make the effort to buy it. We bought most of it at a traumatic auction.
Were you there?
I was there. Morris and I were sitting there wondering how high we should bid.
Oh, how nerve-wracking.
Whether we had to go and rob a bank or something. Or take it by force.
Yeah.
Now we own, or the trust owns. I think this whole notion of owning land is ridiculous, actually, but that's the legal language, isn't it? The land owns us, really. But yeah, that's part of Hinewai now. That made it 10 times bigger in one fell swoop. And ever since then, we've just been identifying bits of land which really make sense, management-wise and ecologically. And when the opportunities come up, we try and be ready to jump at them.
We've arrived at what you call the beach terrace. What's unique about this area here?
Well, it's just that normally the beech forest remaining on the southeast corner of Banks Peninsula is in deep gullies. Yeah. And here it's just a flat spur.
With lots of big old trees.
And huge old trees. And because the soils are relatively thin here, there was black beech in here as well.
What sparked your interest in botany in the first place?
I suspect it was, it's hard to say, isn't it? But I had parents who just loved the outdoors. Dad was a very keen fly fisherman. Mum was a very keen walker. And we went on these amazing family holidays, camping holidays, with 2 big family tents. Mm. We went all over the place. So I suspect that's what sparked it.
Mm. And ever since then, it's been a huge thing in your life.
Yes, and I always do. I mean, this has been a large part of my life. Now, I've been here for 37 years. So I'm 79 now. What does that make it? What proportion of my life? It's quite a big chunk. But pre that, I was just always dreaming about looking after a bit of land to let nature reassert herself. Yep.
Hugh Wilson of Hinewai Reserve talking to Cosmo Kentish Barnes. Well, that's it from the Country Life team this week. The stories in this episode were produced and presented by Cosmo Kentish Barnes, Janina Schwanecker and me, Sally Round, and engineered by Phil Benj and William Saunders. I hope you'll tune in again next week for another edition in the summer series. And don't forget to follow the Country Life podcast, which you can find on any podcast platform. And there are photos and stories and a whole feast of Country Life listening on rnz.co.nz/countrylife. Bye for now.